Oh, hey everyone! You caught me in the middle of a little snorkel. I'm down here in a reef. That's right, there are some rocks and fish behind me. I'm actually right here in the Straits of Mackinac in one of our reefs because this is the Life of the Straits program. Welcome everyone to our third installment to the third week of the Life of the Straits program. Now you might be asking yourself, what am I doing out here on a reef? I thought we were talking about lighthouses today. Well, we are going to talk about lighthouses today, but one of the really cool things is that many of our lighthouses are actually found on these Great Lakes area reefs. So let's dive a little bit more in. I'm going to get out of the water here, and we're going to check out the Straits area, the lighthouses, and learn a little bit about reefs in just a moment. Well, I'm out of the water now, and as you can see here, we've got our great map to the Great Lakes. And just as a reminder, this whole program is centered on the Straits of Mackinac, this area right between the lower and the upper peninsula of Michigan. Now, as we zoom in, we can see again that the Straits really encompasses not just the water between the upper and lower peninsula, but also all the land where water drains off into the Straits. That's right, last week we learned about watersheds and the Sheboygan watershed and how what happens on land makes its way eventually into the Great Lakes. But today what we're going to be talking about are the Straits area lighthouses. Now, Kaylee Fessler, our amazing 4-H coordinator from Presque Isle County, is going to share a lot about lighthouses in a moment. But before we get to that, I'm just going to channel in a little bit on a few lighthouses that are out in the middle of the water. Now, you might be saying, why would there be lighthouses way out from shore? I thought lighthouses were to help captains to know not to run into shore. But out in the middle of the water, you might be surprised to learn there's something called a reef. A reef is essentially a set of rocks in the water that are concentrated in a particular area. And normally they're pretty close to the surface. In fact, sometimes they might even break the surface and be like a shoal where you can actually see the rocks above the water. Now we're going to look at 3 reefs today that have lighthouses on them before we get into our main program. And the first reef is down here at the bottom, just north of Sheboygan a little bit, out in the middle of the lake. And it's called Spectacle Reef because the rocks are in the shape of spectacles. So there's 2 big groups of rocks there that are only about 7 feet from the surface of the water. Now, besides not wanting to run into these reefs, they're actually really important for a lot of species that live in the Great Lakes. This is a Great Lakes whitefish. It's such a tasty fish. They taste so good. If you've ever eaten at a restaurant in northern Michigan and it's local fish, you probably had whitefish. Now, the whitefish spend a lot of their time out in the open water, but when they need to lay their eggs, they have to lay them on a reef to protect the eggs from predators and from the weather. And so reefs are really important for things like lake whitefish or lake trout. Without them, we wouldn't have those species in the lakes. Another one of our reefs up here is the Detour Reef. It's a beautiful, nice lighthouse set out there in the right at the south end of the channel. And this reef has actually a great recreational opportunity in the form of a shipwreck. So this is a 3-masted schooner, the L, that sunk back in the 1800s, and you can still see the remnants of that shipwreck today out there. Finally, let's look at Martin Reef, St. Martin's Reef, which is about 7 miles out from the Lachino Islands area. I've actually been on this lighthouse. It's pretty neat. And it's really important for things like birds. Well, actually, the reefs themselves are important for birds, like the state-threatened species common tern, which feed on a lot of the fish, like you saw swimming behind me earlier down in the reef. But they also are a little landing spot for things like gulls, and sometimes they even end up with breeding bird colonies on them, like this herring gull. Finally, these little songbirds called warblers fly up from South America, and when they cross the Great Lakes, it's a really long journey for them, and having places like lighthouses out in the water can be a little refuge for them in case of a storm or if they need a rest. So there's a few of our different lighthouses that are on reefs and a little bit of info about these. Now we're going to turn it over to Kaylee Fessler to learn a little bit more, a lot more actually, about the lighthouses of the Great Lakes.
Thank you for that really great introduction to our Life of the Straits program tonight. I'm kind of inspired to go scuba diving and check out all the rest of our Great Lakes areas as soon as possible. But first, let's dive into a little bit more about our lighthouses. So I'm going to share some maps with you tonight. This first map is the lighthouses of Lake Michigan. You can see that there are a great deal of lighthouses on the shores of Lake Michigan and some really incredible landmarks that will tell the tale of lighthouse keepers, sailors, and navigators alike. So Elliot, I'm going to ask you to share a poll question right now before we go any further. Looking at the lighthouses of Lake Superior while you're pulling that question up. What US state boasts the most lighthouses?
Looks like everyone got Michigan for that.
Great answers, everyone. So obviously we know a lot about where the lighthouses are located. Did you know that Michigan is home to more lighthouses than any other state? Apparently you did. That's an undeniable excuse to get out and venture and explore some of these really special spots. Our next coastline is the lighthouses of Lake Huron. So we can look at this map here. So with 3,200 miles of shoreline, one of the nation's most active waterways, it's no wonder that Michigan claims more lighthouses than any other state in the country. Scattered along the shoreline, Michigan lighthouses offer waypoints to those on water and are landmarks of history for those on land. Elliot, let's go ahead and share another poll question here while we look at the lighthouses of the Straits of Mackinac.
So this next question has to do, you just said Michigan has the most. How many lighthouses are there currently on the coastline of Michigan, do you think? Just a few more seconds to click your answer. And there we go, Kaylee. We've got quite a spread. 210, 124, and 52 are all answers. What's the right answer?
So the right answer is 124 currently in the state of Michigan. So the Straits of Mackinac, so there's some really good answers there. Nice job. So the Straits of Mackinac boast more than 30 of Michigan's charming and historic lighthouses. And we're going to take a look at the map a little closer of just the ones on the Straits of Michigan. So now we're going to look a little closer at one of the very invaluable, charming, and historic lighthouses on the Straits of Mackinac, the 40 Mile Point Lighthouse. As you can see by the red arrow on the map here, that's the location that we're going to visit tonight when we talk with lighthouse keeper Eric Klein. Unlike many Great Lakes lighthouses, 40 Mile Point Lighthouse does not mark a significant port, but was built so that ships would never be out of viewing range of a lighthouse. The lighthouse was built in 1896 to assist ships through the shoreline, where open water, hidden shoals, and false bays have claimed a number of vessels. One of those vessels is actually the Joseph S. Fay, one of 27 ships that sank during a single fierce storm in 1905. Until the recent water levels increased, you could see about 150 foot of her sidewall resting on the beach near the lighthouse. You can currently see a little bit of the remains in the sands there, but you'll have to check out the 40 Mile Point Lighthouse to see for yourself. Right now, we're going to take a closer look at the 40 Mile Point Lighthouse. And I'm going to share a video with you of lighthouse keeper Eric Klein. Enjoy.
Our lighthouse was built in 1896. It was one of three sisters. There was 14 Mile Point, Big Bay Point, and then ours, 40 Mile, was built on the same basic plans. The lighthouse service would do that. They'd kind of make a plan and then copy it a few times. Our lighthouse didn't mark any bad stretches of shoreline. There's no rocks or anything dangerous here. What it was is just a coastal light. The idea was that the lighthouse establishment wanted to have a light visible at all times along the shoreline. So to the south of us is Presqu'Île Light, to the north of us was Spectacle Reef, and there was about 5 to 10 mile dead zone between the two lights. So they put us, it's kind of like your cell phones. You get a dead zone, they want to put a tower in the middle of it so that you always have coverage. So they picked our spot. We're 40 miles from Mackinac Point. That's why 40 Mile Point. So they approved our project in 1895. 1896 in June, they landed their work party here. They proceeded to build what's our gift shop now. It was a station barn. The crew stayed in that, used it as a bunkhouse, if you will, while they were building the actual structures here. Immediately after building that building, they proceeded to build the 150-foot dock. They started the foundations of the fog signal building. They built the oil house, the original outhouse, and started digging foundations for the lighthouse proper.
So Elliot, if you would share a poll question with us, I'd like to know something about what our participants know.
So Eric just asked how long you think it would take to complete this structure, and you got some answers there. You've got answers rolling in. I'll leave it open for a few more seconds. Give it your best guess. 3, 2, 1. And let's see. Ooh, we're a little split. Half think 4 months, half think a year.
So those are some really great answers, and I'm going to let Eric Klein continue, and he'll answer that question for us.
A lot of people in today's world think, how long would it take to build a structure like this? And you should get a year or two. It took them 4.5 months to build this whole station. Yes. So our lighthouse itself has 3 layers of brick, then a 2-inch dead aerospace, and then another layer of brick. So there's a lot of brick in this structure. All the trim and woodwork would have been relatively close pre-cut, so they only had to fit things in. The tower stairs were all pre-assembled in the factory, dismantled, and they all have little marks on them, Roman numerals to what section they go. So a lot of it was kind of like a big jigsaw puzzle and easy to put together. There was a work crew of about 25 men and a couple of ladies that worked on the project. The light apparatus, our original lens was a 4th order. There's 6 orders altogether. First being the biggest ordered lens, which is about 12 feet tall, and the smallest ordered lens is 6th, which is about this high. So ours was a 4th order bullseye type lens. The whole lens would rotate. There was 6 flash panels on the lens, and as the lens rotated, those panels would line up with your sight and give a flash. So we had 1 flash every 10 seconds. There was a clockwork mechanism that you hand crank, and a lot of people think, oh, just crank it up. No, it's like 80 to 90 turns going like with a 40-pound weight at the end of it. So there's a lot of manual work to this. That had to be wound up every 2.5 hours. So it was not like crank it up and then go to bed. You actually had to maintain that light for your whole shift. Now we had 2 keepers here. The reason is we had a fog signal, and if this didn't have a fog signal, we'd only have 1 keeper, and he and his family would have tended the light all night. With 2 keepers, they'd split the shift on normal nights. If it was foggy, snowy, or sleet, or anything that obscured the visibility, one of the keepers had to go out to the fog signal building, and in which we had 2 boilers, 2 with steam engines and whistles. They'd use one of those at a time. The other one served as a backup. And you'd light the fire, oil the engines, get everything going. It took 40 minutes to raise steam. And as soon as the pressure got 70 pounds, then you could start the steam engine, which ran a timing device which pulled the lever to open the steam valve and blew the whistle. So our characteristic for that was 1 3-second blast with 17-second silence. Every station had characteristics. So our light flashed once every 10 seconds. Our fog signal was a 3-second blast with 17-second silence. The next station up would have a totally different characteristic. Presqu'île had a fixed white light, which would be far brighter than anything on the shore, so mariners would know where they're at. Like I said, every light had a little bit different. Some were red, some were green, just depending on what was around it. And then they copy those in different sections of the lake, but you kind of knew where you were in relation to which ones you were seeing, I guess. The light, our original lens was taken out in 1918. The correspondence that we are privileged to have copies of from the Lighthouse Service suggested that they remove the lens from the 40 Mile Point Lighthouse to install in the more important Sand Hills Lighthouse, which is up in the Keweenaw Peninsula. They did, and they gave us our existing lens, which I'll get to in a minute. Sand Hills, it seems like they used our lens for 2 years and the characteristic changed to something that couldn't have been our lens. We don't know what happened to it after. Sand Hills was discontinued in the 1950s. We're still operational, so who's more important? So, the lens we have now is a 4th order beehive type lens. It doesn't rotate. When they put it in though, we had what was called an IOV lamp at the time. It's an incandescent oil vapor, very similar to a pump-up Coleman lantern. Had the sock on it that got white hot, very bright, very cantankerous. They complained about it all the time. It was always gumming up and the tubes burning out and things. Not at our lighthouse, but other lighthouses had these things explode on them. And one report says the feeder tube came off the IOV and it sprayed pressurized kerosene in the lens and lantern, and the lens became alight. In other words, burst into flames. So could be a little bit dangerous job. So one had to be. You always had sand and such for such emergencies because they had no fire extinguishers at the time.
Elliot, in talking about the light right now, I think this is a really good time to ask another question of our participants. Could you share another poll with us, please?
So what is the purpose of a lighthouse? It's talking a lot about this light and all the intricate details that goes into creating that, but why spend so much time and effort? So feel free to select your answers, and this one is multiple choice, and you can select multiple answers if you think multiple are correct. So feel free to pick as many of the answers as you want. Well, it looks like people shared a lot of answers. And Kaylee, do you want to talk about the answers to this? Are you wanting to?
Absolutely. If you would like to share that, Elliot, I'd love that.
Sure. So most of you guessed probably the most correct two, which is to help prevent boats from running into shore or help prevent them from running into rocks or shoals in the water. That's probably what you could say the original purpose is. But it also, we'll find out later, helped boaters know where they were. If they could identify the lighthouse, they knew on a map where they were. And today, they're really maintained in some cases for their beauty and for the grandeur that they retain. So really, you could have said any of the answers. Good job, everyone.
Excellent answers, everyone. Let's continue on our lighthouse adventure.
So our lens, though, is very unique. There's only one other one that we know of, but when they built our lens, they took sections of 3 different lenses. If a lens got damaged beyond repair, they would take it to the lighthouse depot and store it for parts. And so our lens was parts of 3 different ones that were put together. But our keepers complained to the logs that our lens was far inferior to the original Bullseye lens. So because Bullseye lenses tend to focus more of the light in one direction, whereas the Beehive kind of has this narrow band of light, whereas the Bullseye fills this whole prism up with light, so they're a lot brighter. But she's been up there since 1919, and ours is the last working Fresnel lens on Lake Huron. In 1932, I believe it is, they started retrofitting our fog signal from the big whistles. They had a 10-inch whistle with 18-inch high to the diaphones, which are the big horns sticking out of the front of the building. Those ran off a diesel compressor, Chicago Pneumatics to be exact. And what they would do is they go out, it took them about 5 minutes to fire up the system rather than 40 minutes. So they go out there, prepare the engine, get it running, and then fill up the compressor tanks with compressed air, which are huge. They were about 10 foot long, and I think the tanks were at least 3-4 feet diameter. And they would fill those up with compressed air, and then that was piped up to the big horns in the front, and they had a really weird disc system. The disc would spin and pressure differentials. This is a really complicated system, but it gave you that sound. And they kept our 3-second blast with 17-second silence for the time being. But they changed out one side of the boilers, and then they changed the other side after they got the first one running. So what happened to our boilers? Who knows? Probably scrapped them, unfortunately. A lot of people tell me, what's it like living in a lighthouse? It's a big Victorian house with a big tower on the lake. So if you've lived in a big Victorian house, you kind of get a feel of it. If you lived on the lake, you kind of get a part of the feel of it. If you truly appreciate history and feel the connection with history, it's awesome. It's hard to perfectly describe. Some days I walk up and I go, I really live here. It's like, wow. But I grew up in this house. The lighthouse service was absorbed into the Coast Guard in 1939. At the time, the keepers had a choice. They could stay civilian keepers. All keepers before this time were civilian, kind of like a National Park employee or something like that. There was no military rank or what have you. They were given that choice to stay in the civilian role, or they could join the Coast Guard and get a Coast Guard ranking. Half chose the civilian, half chose the Coast Guard. Well, our lighthouse maintained civilian keepers until 1952, and the Coast Guard let the civilians retire out, basically. 52 and onward, we had a Coast Guard presence here. In 1970, the Coast Guard decided to sell off everything except the house and 2 acres around it to Presque Isle County, and that's when it became Presque Isle County Lighthouse Park. 1990s, though, the Coast Guard decided to sell the house and 2 acres to the county, this would be totally a park, and the Coast Guard only retained ownership of the lens and the wiring to it. So they still maintain the lights, and the lens is officially off limits. 40 Mile Point Lighthouse Society was formed in the mid-90s. Their goal was to preserve the buildings and to start a museum, which they did. And I've been privileged to help out with getting some of the original colors back in the rooms and doing some restoration myself. That's what I do as secular employment. So, me growing up here. So, since 1971, the county's always maintained a caretaker. My dad grew up a mile down the beach at the Manitou Shores, moved us back to the area. He'd moved away, and we were staying with Grandma, and he got a call from a relative, and he says, yeah, I need a reference from your ma to get into the lighthouse. And my dad's like, oh, they need a reference to get in. So he put his application in, and we were the only family to apply. So we moved in May of 1984. So I lived here for 8 years growing up. It was awesome. We had no museum. It was just us, and we enjoyed the park and maintained it. I got married and moved out in 1992, and in the meantime Dad had passed away, so Mom remarried. She was here 16 years altogether. And after she and her husband left, we had moved up to the Keweenaw. There was 2 other caretakers here, and in the meantime we moved back down, and I started volunteering in my spare time. and we just we decided to leave and put our hat in the ring, and we got the position. So been here a year and a half since, and love it, just love it.
Preparations for lighting the beacon began well before dusk. Imagine climbing the 54 stairs to the tower here at the 40 Mile Point Lighthouse, often with the additional weight of heavy fuel for the lamp. Not once, but many times per night. The lamp that produced the light was checked and the supply of fuel refilled. The wick was trimmed and lighted. The weights, which dropped down the tower shaft, driving gears that caused the lens to revolve, were unlocked and hand cranked to the top, and a new descent was started. The keeper must not leave the light for at least a half an hour after lighting in order to see that it is burning properly, and must visit the light at least twice more between 8 p.m. and sunrise. And on stormy nights, it must be constantly looked after. The invaluable keeper not only carried a weighty responsibility, but also the satisfaction of helping people every day by keeping the light that guided countless ships, crews, passengers, and cargo safely to the next beacon. In the required logbook, the keeper made daily handwritten entries in ink detailing operations at the lighthouse, weather and water conditions, ship traffic, and anything out of the ordinary at the light station, the surrounding community, or in the local waters. Being a lighthouse keeper was not a 9-to-5 job. It was anything but. A typical tour of duty began before dusk and continued well past dawn. The keeper tended to routine but essential duties, made repairs as needed, and was always prepared to respond to any emergency, including shipwrecks. Of most importance was the fact that lives depended on the lighthouse keeper.
So now I'd like to share some ideas that we hope you've been inspired by the beauty and history of what you've seen. Elliot?
That's right. It's time for our weekly activity challenge. And thankfully, right after this, stick around. Eric is actually here today to help answer any additional questions you have about lighthouse keeping or the 40 Mile Point Lighthouse, or if you just have general lighthouse questions, we can try to answer that too. But your challenge today as a family or as an individual, whoever's watching, is to make a piece of lighthouse art. So if you wouldn't mind stop sharing real quick here, Kaylee. We'll turn all our videos on, all of our 4-H or 3 4-H people and me. So we've got Leanne there. Susan should be on in a second. And then there's Kaylee. Thanks for that great video. So your challenge is to make a piece of lighthouse-inspired art. And each one of us is going to share a piece of lighthouse-inspired art that we either found or that we created ourselves. So I'm actually going to share a poem that Susan wrote just right before this started. I had a different poem somebody else wrote, and then Susan's like, I'm inspired. And she made this poem right before. So here's the poem, and then we'll see some other. And remember, your challenge is to make any kind of art that's inspired by Lighthouse. So here we go. A poem by Susan Kirkman. Oh, lighthouse, my lighthouse, how tall do you stand, your light touching sea and sand. How many have you saved? Only you can tell. Your strong, steady walls will never let me down. Until a time when man stays ashore, your guiding light we will always need more. Oh, lighthouse, my lighthouse, please never stop. Your shining light resonates with my heart. What a great poem, Susan. Thanks. And what piece of art do you have to share?
I have a piece of art that my mother actually created for me, and it's pretty easy to create yourself, but this is a lighthouse made out of terracotta plants and a simple garden light, and it lights up at night.
So cool. Leanne, what do you got?
So I love to quilt, and sometimes it's fun to quilt with paper instead of with fabric. So I created a lighthouse out of different types of papers.
Wow, like a 3D picture with different kinds of paper. How cool, using those mediums there. And Kaylee, how about you? What art do you have?
So I'm going to share with you a piece of art I've done. So I just simply painted the back of a canvas and found some stones and made a great memory and a creative piece of art.
Awesome. So you can see, you can even take inspiration from nature. Oh, that's right. Kaylee, you want to share this too? Sorry.
One other thing before we move on to Eric and answer a few, hopefully he'll have a few questions answered for us. So if you're looking for a really fun family activity, you could grab a lighthouse passport offered by the United States Lighthouse Society and have it signed at all of the lighthouses that you visit. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we are going to welcome Eric Klein. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And with Eric is his wife, Lisa, who is also a significant part of our great lighthouse. So to our participants, does anyone here have some questions? And their children?
That's right. Mine are right back here too. They like to hop on sometimes.
Behind the sand dune there, eh?
That's right. So I got these virtual backgrounds on. So you can type your questions into the Q&A at the bottom. If you're an attendee right now, go ahead and feel free and type your questions down there at any point. So I have a question actually, inspired by what you guys have going on down there. What's your kids' favorite thing about living in the lighthouse? Or maybe, Eric, you said you were there as a kid as well. What's your family's favorite thing about living in the lighthouse?
Ask them. What's your favorite thing?
All right, well, I think one of my favorite things, one is the tower. It's super cool to have a house with a tower on it. And also it's the lake. Like, I love the lake so much. Hearing it at night, it's kind of like a lullaby. You know, you hear all those stories, like the lake, it's like comforting and it's really nice. In fact, we took a trip last summer and there was no lake and I couldn't barely sleep because I'm just so used to the sound. I think that's one of my favorite things.
I was lucky enough to grow up on the lake and the sound is just wonderful.
My favorite thing living at a lighthouse is a tower. It's so nice that dark and to see a light flash and a lake. It's beautiful. I like to go swimming in it. And there's a woods, which is fun to walk around. Got forts and a lot of things interesting living at a lighthouse, and a lighthouse itself too.
Well, first of all, everything they said, and second, I enjoy it myself too, going outside in the middle of the night one time. And the light shines, it kind of shines in the tower, and it's really bright, and it's so beautiful. And I've never really seen anything like that before, where in the places I've lived, and also living on the lake. Very, very nice place.
So I so agree with Cheryl, who just put in the chat, lucky kids. And
Yeah, they are. They are.
yeah,
It is
thank you, all of you, for answering those.
You're welcome.
So I can't see all the questions, but somebody asked if the stove in the kitchen works. The next, we have the museum. We just bought that stove, and it is a functioning cook stove. But our kitchen, we have, and we just had dinner, so I would show you, but we have a 1930s gas range, Chambers. It's one of those with the side burners and then the side oven. That's what we cook on right now. But we have a 1902 Favorite Stove Company wood burning cook stove. And before we moved down from the Keweenaw, Lisa and I, that's all we cooked on. For 10 years, we cooked on a wood cook stove. So we have it sitting in the kitchen, and our society is working towards getting the county to allow us to use the one next door for demonstration purposes. And if they do that, well, then maybe we can finagle in to use ours again, which we really love to.
That's awesome. That kind of gets me thinking too of another question. And again, if you're a participant or attendee, feel free to chat in the Q&A section. Actually, we do have another question coming in there. So before I ask mine, selfishly, the question was, do your children have chores or things jobs to do around the lighthouse that are maybe unique or maybe just the same kind of thing we all have to do?
Basically, Evan's getting towards, he can mow now, so that's one of his things. Cora does an excellent job keeping things nice and tidy. She's really good at that. Helps Lisa out a lot. And Anthony is learning to do dishes. Evan does dishes. So it's the typical things that kids do. When I grew up here, same types of things. Of course, living in a park, you have to keep up the park a little really nice. So, go through the yard, pick up things. But back when I lived here, the Coast Guard didn't have so many stringent rules. But they kept the tower locked. And one of my little anecdotes is I was 12, and they come twice a year to check the light bulb. And then I ran up the tower behind them when they came, asked a bunch of questions. They left and locked the door. Well, the next time they came, they went up there and asked a bunch of questions. They left and they forgot to lock the door. So I, with a broom and Brasso in hand, went up. I swept 10 years of dead flies out of the tower. There was boards over the windows. I knocked those out, cleaned the glass, and proceeded to polish the lens, which nowadays is a really, really bad no-no. Our lens is very special, and I'll get to that in just a second. So I polished it. It was beautiful. The next time the Coast Guard came, we had a new commander, which we had nothing to do with, but he oversaw the lights. So he comes in with his two guys, and they come in and they go up the tower, and I follows them up. And I gets up to the top of the tower, and I'm down below on the stairs, and he gets up and he's all stern looking, and he looks at the lens. He goes, "Who did this?" And the two coasties are sitting there going, "Oh, we don't know." And I'm down below, 13 years old, mind you. I go, "I did." And he looks down at me and goes, "Good job. Just don't ever touch the light bulb. Keep up the good work." And so I'm the last person to polish, which is the last working for now lens on Lake Huron. So I'll leave it for questions now.
That's a great story. So the question I was going to ask when you started talking about the stove, so is there running water inside the building, or did electricity have to get run through the building after it was made, or was that all originally put in there? I was trying to gauge the timeline when the building was built, when electricity.
Electricity was put in 1949 with the plumbing. So before that, we used the outhouse. The tower was electrified by generators in 1943, but it only ran the light bulb. Water, we have a cistern down by the lake, basically a little dome-shaped brick thing that acts like a well. And the idea behind that was they had a pump with a windmill. So if you come out here, you'll see a windmill up front. That represents the one that used to be here. And that would pump water up to a tank on the hillside. Now from there, I don't know how it works, but I think it might have come in and been able to, on the kitchen sink, they would have maybe had a pump. Later, they put a cistern out in the backyard, capturing the gutter water, and that was plumbed into the kitchen sink with a hand pump. But electrical, turn the tap water was 1949.
Well, it's nice that you guys have all that now.
It's overrated.
Yeah. Let's see questions that might be coming in here. How many visitors do you get to the lighthouse on an annual basis?
When the museum's open, our guest book is registering around 9,000, give or take, a year, and that's the ones who sign the book. And I would say probably another 2,000-3,000 at least don't sign it. And then there's the ones who just come to the park. And so of course this year we're closed because of the blessed virus. So no one's coming into the house right now, but the park is pretty busy. So we got a lot of tourists.
Yeah, that must be unique, kind of living in a park. That's
Yeah.
lots of people in and out all the time. Bet you get to
Yeah.
meet a lot of cool people. Where's the farthest somebody has come from to see the lighthouse?
We've had people from foreign countries.
Was here today from China.
Oh, I was just gonna say China.
Yeah, somebody was just here today from China. So
Wow, that's far.
that's pretty far. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had from Australia, China, Russia. We had somebody who lives in Detroit, but they're from Russia. You name it, pretty much, we get people from all over stop in.
That's really neat. So, how is the maintenance cost covered for the lighthouse and for paint and all that? Is that all through the society? Do they raise funds?
The society does a lot with funding. We have a good society. We get some good donations. We have somebody gave us a trust to use for restoration work. So that helps tremendously. The county owns all the buildings and the park itself, so they do have a budget. So they spend some money on us. So between the two, we have pretty good maintenance here. Right now we're we're repainting our trim back to the original green it was. It's been white since the 60s. And right now we're working on the fog signal building. We're repainting the roof and doing the trim in there. So people like to volunteer. We're always looking.
Well, that's good to know. This is another question coming in is how much are the lighthouses still used for navigation and to avoid by ships? Or is it mostly now that people are using GPS and things like that?
GPS is definitely the predominant and must say a better system. That said, the captains do like to have the lights out there. Small boats love them. They have their handheld GPSs in their little systems, but if they should go down, which they do, they always have the lighthouses as backups. And I've talked to quite a few people. I work up at McGilpin Point most years, not this year though. And I asked people there too who sail, and they said the same thing, that they like to have those lights out there as backups. They're just reassuring. So they are used, just not near to the extent that they were even 50 years ago.
Well, that's pretty neat though, because obviously they have a lot of value as a tourist attraction and as a park and as a quality of life thing, inspiring art, but they still serve that purpose of helping boaters too. So that's really neat to hear.
One of your poll questions was why they built these places, and it asked to be beautiful. And yes, they were designed to be beautiful. They had a practical purpose, but our light, it was kind of interesting. You saw the pictures of our sister lights. The 14-mile point, the one that's burned out now, was absolutely exquisitely built. It had stone cornices, arched porches, fluted chimneys, just all sorts of gingerbread and detail. It was 14 miles by boat to Ontonagon. There's nothing out there. No one was going to see this thing. Our light, when they built it, ours was the last built of the three. We have some of the paperwork, and they said to forego all the gingerbread and fancy stuff and basically keep it easy maintenance, because no one's going to see this. And ours is probably of the three, ours is the most visited one, I believe. And so this is a very simple Victorian house. And if you look at it, there's all sorts of little details still sprinkled in the building. But so yeah, they were designed to look at too, because the government was very proud of them. So as a keeper, historically, I would have to do what I do now, is take people on tours of the light station.
Yeah. Just some affirmation coming in from Cheryl in the chat that she loves how lighthouses connect us with the past and how we can get a window into the past of priorities, and even with those details and the beauty, we don't always see in modern buildings. So that's pretty neat. We still got a few more minutes if you guys are okay. A couple more questions.
I got about 5 more minutes tops.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we'll wrap it up with, if anybody has one last question, please put it in the chat or the Q&A now, or if not, then I'm going to ask the last question. Or Kaylee, do you have any questions to ask me?
No, I think you're good, Eric. Elliot.
All right. I'll ask this last question, and maybe you're really biased, but what's you and each of your family members' favorite lighthouse in the Great Lakes? Is it the one?
I am not biased. I can honestly say with a straight face that this lighthouse is the most beautiful lighthouse in the world. I have no prejudice whatsoever. Just because I live here does not mean I'm prejudiced. But that said, I think all lighthouses, all historic lighthouses, have some beauty. If one's to research some of the old French lighthouses from the early 1800s, some of them are exquisitely beautiful. They put marble in them and all sorts of things. Just Google it, and you'll see some of the interior pictures, just gorgeous. A lot of the states, Atlantic, Pacific, seaboards, Great Lakes, just each one has a different beauty to it. So, but I do think ours is one of the nicer ones out there. It's well proportioned.
Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, answering all these questions, and for your time on the video. Hopefully, you guys can get some use out of that video too. I think it was really educational, really great. Kaylee, you did a great job making that. Go ahead.
If anyone, I don't know how many are listening to that, but if anyone's interested in more information and such, feel free to stop by. We're usually out, or somebody's out in the yard. So just depends, or get a hold of Kaylee if she get a hold of more questions for. Love talking about lighthouse stuff and just love the history of it all. So.
Well, great. If you're an attendee, we have recorded this, so we'll be sending out a link to the recording, and we'll also send out some links to some additional information on the 40 Mile Point Lighthouse, and a reminder of our challenge, which is to create a piece of lighthouse art. And if you'd like to share that with us, you can email it to me at elliotne@msu.edu, or you can post it to our private Facebook group, which I will send the link out to in the follow-up email as well. So thank you all so much, and have a great night. And we will see you next week for our next Life of the Straits, focused on the Lachino Island area. So that's all. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So is the meeting done?